So it looks like a hobby, but it's his business, and his business is perfectly detailed replica miniatures. And the first time I met him, I'm talking about William Robertson, the next page in your book, I was looking at him, but he was showing a miniature, and my angle of attack was such that he seemed huge. He seemed like giant beanstalk, and there was this exceptional replica that worked perfectly in every possible detail with all its moving parts, and I was completely captivated. I wondered, how does this kind of occupation come to be? Can it be a living for a man of that size? And I convinced William to come out here and give us some of the answers. So this is William Robertson.
Thank you.
It's great to see you here, William. Thank you so much.
See you. Yes, I build miniatures. I build miniatures of old things. I build miniatures of old things, but the unique thing is I do it the old way. In a sense, I joked with someone earlier today, I build toys for children over the age of 55 because by that time they've collected everything full-size they need to own, are starting to run out of space, and I can solve that problem. I think, 30 years ago, if there was such a conference like this, the people talking about AI would be the unique ones. Now someone like me that builds things with their hands with manual machines is the unique one. And this piece is an 18th century English gentleman's tool chest, and everything in it works because there's no point of building things if they don't work. The saw has 160 teeth to the inch. I know you do metric, I tried to convert it, it didn't work. The plane can shave 1/10 of a millimeter off. And I actually use little planes like this in my work. And in a sense, I'm the opposite of the artist Claes Oldenburg, who takes everyday items and blows them up huge for the public. I take little obscure things and shrink them down to be viewed in private. And I do everything from furniture, roller skates, the mundane, the unusual, whatever intrigues me, but it has to work. The little skate key actually tightens these. We wonder why miniatures. Miniatures have been around since the beginning of time. Every culture has had miniatures. The museum next door has Egyptian miniatures, has Chinese miniatures. There was the Renaissance, there were architectural models, Baroque jewelry, Fabergé, teaching tools, patent models. It's one of those things, you either get it or you don't. And I got it. Even at 11 years old, I was living in a land full of miniatures. And as Moses asked, how can someone like me make a living at this? It's about your background. I learned history from my great-grandmother. She went to watch Lincoln's funeral train go by. I grew up in Washington, D.C., and my parents would take me to the Smithsonian and drop me off, and that was my babysitter. When I was in school, instead of doing a book report, I hated to read when I was in school, I would build models. Here's a little Anne Frank's house I did in like the 7th grade, and a model of the dioramas from the trenches from World War I. And I had a workshop. It started when I was 9 years old in the corner of the basement, and it grew, and it grew, and it grew. And to me, having less than about 1,000 square foot workshop, I can't imagine that. I was the little kid that would drag home broken lawnmowers and radios and fix them and make them work. And by the time I was a teenager, I was dragging home cars. And I was the sort of street racer Bruce Springsteen sang about. And by the time I was 20, my parents' backyard was full of cars. And my father said, your mother wants a dollhouse for her grandchildren, and you are going to build it, or all your junk can get out of the backyard. So I built this dollhouse. I wanted nothing whatsoever to do with it. And as I kind of built that, I got a little interested, and I thought, it needs a little desk. And I knew nothing about furniture. And I decided I'm going to build a little desk. And this junk mail piece came in the mail with a picture of a desk. And I said, I'm going to build that desk. And I did build that desk. And people saw that desk, and they wanted those desks. So I started building them desks. And here at 21 years old, I was in the business of making little furniture. And the neat thing about this was it brought everything in my life to that point together. My love of small things, my love of history, and my love of building things. So I just kept building stuff. And here it is, over 41 years later, I'm still doing this. And my work is in public and private collections throughout the world. It's been a great job, if you could call it that, but I don't even think of it as a job. I have to give a great deal of thanks to my parents because they didn't make me go get a job. They're like, kid building this in the basement? Fine. And who knew, you know? And also the early collectors that supported my career and bought my things. You know, all artists need that justification, and you know, checks do very well at that. When I was in my mid-20s, I thought, you know, that little dollhouse I built for Mom, piece of junk. I'm going to build a real one. I also had this fictitious idea that you could build 2 of these. So it's named Twin Manors. I figure if you cut 1 piece of wood, you can cut 2. That doesn't quite work as easily. There's 1,000 pieces in this stairway. What you're looking at is a foot high, that big. It's about detail. I love detail. And the thing with miniatures, this is the drawing room. The thing with miniatures, a man looking at Queen Mary's dollhouse years ago said, in miniature, you can see so much more because you can see all of it in one eyeful. In a miniature room, you can see the floor, the wall, all 3 walls, the floor and the ceiling, all at one time. Whereas in a real room, you look there, you look there. It's different. You see more in miniatures. And in a sense, I can go back and create, you know, my great-grandmother's drawing room in physical 3D, not this digital stuff. You know, in a sense, miniaturists are control freaks. We can freeze time. The dishes never get dirty in this room. We just can freeze a moment, freeze anything we want. We can change anything we want. We can make it our way. I'm always asked, do you do miniatures for movies? And the answer is no, and I do not, because in the movie world, if the camera's not going to see the left side, they don't build the left side of the thing. Not only do I build the left side, I build everything the way it's supposed to be built. So here's a little spice cabinet, and it's dovetailed. So I cut dovetails. The drawers are dovetailed. So I cut dovetails. Now these are all done by hand. The lock works, so I make microscopic parts to make the lock work. And when I'm all done, this piece is only 1.25 inches high, you know, tiny. And no one sees most of that detail. But that doesn't matter to me. That's the way I have to build it. I have to do it the right way. You know, people ask, what do you make these things out of? Well, if wood is wood, I use wood. I like to use old wood. This is a little Danish tea table, and it's a 400-year-old piece of yew wood. And I'm sometimes asked, you know, they're like, you know, I'm a cabinet maker, sort of, but I jokingly say I'm an environmentalist because no tree's ever been cut down because of me, because I only use 2 board feet of wood a year. But not only do I capture the grain of the wood, I also go to great lengths to capture the tool marks left by the original maker. And again, everything works. Here's an English architect's desk. You turn the little key and unlock the drawer. You pull it out, you slide the desk back. The top comes up, it latches into place. The candle stands come out, the little ink drawer. The casters, they swivel. It's details. The details matter. You know, if I can see them, if I know about them, I have to copy them. You know, you can't build something unless you know what you're building. So you have to do the research. A friend of mine once said, the research for a major model is equivalent of writing a master's thesis. And once I pulled together a booklet of about 800 pages, I didn't write them all, about the subject I was working on. In this case, this is an 18th century French spinning wheel. Not only do I have the original spinning wheel, that's not good enough. I went back to Bergeron's book of 1792, which the original maker of that spinning wheel probably would have used, and I used that. I make drawings. I do drawings the old-fashioned way. There's no CAD stuff in my house. I don't even know how that works. I made this in 2 different scales. I calculated out to 3 decimal points. However, I let my eye be the final judge. When I'm making something, it has to look right. The numbers have to be pretty close, but it has to look right. That's more important. And this little spinning wheel, this is the wheel. You can see it's the small one, smaller than a coin. There's 16 pieces in that wheel. The crank handle is screwed onto that steel shaft. It's a 0.3 millimeter thread. That's about 4 thicknesses of your human hair. And when it's done, here it is in both scales. A lot of people think, well, how can you even handle this and touch it? Aren't you nervous? Aren't you freaking out? And I'm not, because I don't have a real job. I'm at my calmest when I'm working on this because I don't work in the corporate world. I don't go to meetings. I don't write memos, and a lot of times I don't answer the phone. Here's an environment. I did this architect's classroom. It was institutional green. And I teased, this is in a museum, and I teased them they didn't have anything institutional green. Everything they had was so pretty. And an elderly man came up, was looking at this one day, and he said, "This is the room I was taught in. This is it. This is amazing." And that was one of the proudest moments for me because this room doesn't exist. I designed it. I copied features from a lot of different rooms and put them all together into my room. You know, even things like the blackboard and the lessons on the plan are copied from old textbooks of the period that were in use. The tables, they go up and down, they tilt. Things like the wastebasket. There's 1,020 solder joints just in the wastebasket. When I made the first one, I thought the only people that could afford it might be NASA. And I figured out a better way. And that's the fun of this for me, is figuring out the better way, how to do this. So I made this crazy fixture, and I could solder these things together and keep them perfectly symmetrical and all that. And the whole idea is making tools and using tools. And, you know, all artists, they love their tools. I make miniatures of tools, and I collect antique tools. And, for example, here's a 17th century hand vise. I liked it so much I made a miniature of it. But when I'm using something like this, and I actually use this stuff, and some of the museum people kind of freak out at that, because I don't wear little white gloves while I work, I figure when I'm done with it, they can have it. But, you know, when I'm using a vise like this, it speaks to me. To me, it's like a musician playing a Stradivarius violin, or making art with art. And I get something from this. This whole collecting thing started when I was in my first year of building miniatures. I bought a watchmaker's tool catalog from the 1920s for $2. I wanted everything in it. I got everything in it. Little did I know that little $2 expense was going to cost me hundreds of thousands of dollars over the next 40 years, but it did. I amassed a huge antique tool collection. I now lend things to places like the Smithsonian. These are some machinist tools. You know, my workshop is a mixture of old and new tools, and we have to take new as kind of relative. The newest machine down here is from 1968. You don't see any computers. I never even take my iPad down there, and I don't carry a smartphone. I don't even have a smartphone. There's no CNC, there's no 3D printers, there's none of that stuff. To me, that stuff has no soul. I'm old school. And, you know, I'm so old school that when our National Park Service wanted to restore Thomas Edison and the Wright brothers' workshops, they hired me as a consultant to tell them about the tools, because I use the very same tools. And, you know, when I was a kid, they I used to push my face against the windows at the museum looking at things, and now I'm very nice. They take them off display and hand them to me. These are some 300-year-old ivory turnings that I was playing with in Denmark. And they were done on a machine called a Rose engine. I had to have one. This one came out of Cartier's studio in Paris, was made in the 1830s. And I use these things. It's like a three-dimensional spirograph. It's a lot of fun. And with this, I made a wassail bowl, a glorified punch bowl. And it's very important to me, all this knowledge that I've gained, and by the way, I should say this, I'm a school dropout. College didn't work for me. But yet, if I want to read something in French, I taught myself French. If I want to know something, I will go to the ends of the earth to find out. Anyway, I share this knowledge by teaching. I teach a few classes around the world every year. And another thing, I'm watching my clock here too. I love boxes. And this is a little needlepoint casket my mother and I did years ago. She did the needlepoint and I did the box. There's all these drawers full of sewing accessories. That, by the way, is an inch long. Yeah, here's a little gold jewel box. And, you know, one of my rules about making things is each thing I make has to be better in some way than whatever I did before. Whether it's the technique, the piece, you've got to get better. You never stay the same. This is a reliquary box, bone and steel, working lock, you know, this sort of thing. But people ask a lot of times, well, what's your favorite piece? My favorite piece is the next piece I make. The latest box I made, by the way, was this Dutch Strongbox. It's covered in marquetry, of which 80% of that is obscured by the fancy brass hinges. It took like 4 weeks just to assemble this after I made the parts. It's on a base by my friend Lloyd McCaffrey, and there's many other artists that do this, just a small handful at this level in the world, but there are others. And we all know each other, pretty much. But this chest opens up, you open the lock, and it's filled with secret compartments and drawers and things. The last piece I'm going to show you is a microscope. My niece thought it was a coffee maker. This is, it's made of pure gold in chagrin. It's 2 inches tall. It's a copy of Louis XV's microscope by Pesmont. The original's in the Metropolitan Museum. And it was made by a man known as a mécanicien. And a mécanicien is someone, it's an old French word, that combines mechanics, art, science, and engineering all into one. And that's, in a sense, what I do. And when I made this, I did the research and I realized that you can't polish pure gold. If you touch it, it goes flat. So I had to burnish it. And the old texts say you burnish it with the tooth of a wolf. I was fresh out of wolves. However, I saved my puppy's teeth as she wandered around the house losing them. And I put them on little handles and I burnished this with my little puppy's teeth. So this work is all very, very personal for me. And it comes from my heart. And anyway, really for the last 41 years, all I've done is make beautiful little objects to keep people's eyes happy. Thank you.
So,
this is a brave man with steady hands.
just so you get a sense of the scale we're talking about, which is hard to do in the pictures, I thought I'd bring this out here for all of you to see. Can you get really close in on this?
And this will be out in the lobby afterwards.
Yes.
Can you get your head down behind it?
Yeah, but getting back up might be the problem. I'm of a certain age with knees, you know.
Don't leave them, Moses. Get them back up. Thank you. That's beautiful.
William, that's just extraordinary. And I have two questions. The time it takes to make, you've alluded to some of these pieces. You say they've taken them months and months and months. Can we do it in hours? Like, how many hours would that represent?
The architect's office, our classroom that you saw was about 2,000 hours. The tool chest, which was similar to this one that I opened with, was close to 1,000 hours.
And you do this work yourself. There's no workshop, there are no
I do everything. I
disciples.
make my own screws. I make my own everything. I make the tools to make it, the cutters to grind the moldings, everything. So there's almost no outsourcing at all.
Exceptional. And getting back to the question of your livelihood, so what would it cost to buy
These
it?
pieces were actually made 20 and 30 years ago. It would be a fair statement that a lot of my nicer things, such as, let's say, a tool chest like this, would be the price of a car. Now, cars come in quite a range, so a simpler one would be the price of a more inexpensive car, up to, not a Maybach, but I wish, but a, you know.
Bentley, we're in the Bentley
Not a
range,
Bentley,
no?
more than a Mercedes.
Mercedes.
So, yeah, so they run from tens of thousands to many tens of thousands.
And a final word. Who collects this? And
Really
how
nice
many-
people. You know, one of the best things, and I really didn't get a chance to mention this, is the people that I've met over the years. They tend to be eccentric. They could be accused of that. They are fascinating people. They're collectors, and most of them collect many other things. I have clients that have collected, you know, Roman glass and dueling pistols and, you know, French Impressionists and miniature books, and you go to their homes and it's eye candy. It's just wonderful.
Do you insist on staying strictly in the 17th and 18th century
No,
period?
but mostly that's what I do. I only build things that are of interest to me. I had a client once call me and wanted me to make a piece that I thought was ugly. I said no. He wasn't used to being said no to, but I said, here, call my friend Pierre in France. He loves that kind of stuff. If I'm going to look at it for 6 months, I have to love it.
Have you ever made replica television sets?
No, I don't do technical. I don't do modern. I go
Well,
backwards.
I have some pieces that go back to the 1920s. Are
That's
you going to be
new.
at our party tonight?
Yes, of course.
I'd like to show you my museum of television.
I'd love to see that.
And I'd love you to make, perhaps, a
A small television.
Yeah.
Maybe, we will see. I joke sometimes, I grew up with mid-century modern furniture, and I joke that the last piece I'll probably make is a set of TV trays. Thank you. Thank you for
Yeah, I want to do that.